Welcome to Moonshot Radio with your host, Dr. Nivea Torres.
Greetings and welcome to Moonshot Radio, where every moment is an opportunity to learn. I'm your host, Nivea Torres, Executive Director of the Kindergarten Readiness Collaborative, also known as KRC. Our vision is that all children in Indian River County will be ready for kindergarten. We proudly partner with the Moonshot Movement, who is transforming the next generation in Indian River County by having 90% of all students reading on grade level by the third grade. With me today in the studio, we have Sabine Perways. Sabine is the Executive Director of the Florida Nonprofit Alliance. Sabine, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for visiting Indian River County.
It's my first time.
It's your first time.
Yes.
I know that this morning you were at a special event, the Association of Fundraising Professionals.
Yeah, they had us speak about the economic impact of the nonprofit sector, and it was a really engaged crowd, great conversation, great discussions, and we were thrilled to be invited.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you again for joining us. And Sabine, tell us a little bit about your role as Executive Director of the Florida Nonprofit Alliance.
I call myself the cheerleader for the sector. I'm really proud of the work that we do. Our organization was founded in 2012 to be a central voice for the nonprofit sector, especially with our elected officials in both Tallahassee and DC. So we advocate on behalf of the sector. We put out research for the sector. We help nonprofits with any issue they may have around advocacy or lobbying, and then making sure we're changing the narrative around how the sector is seen and the work of the impact that we're doing.
So that's your primary mission, to be the voice of the nonprofit sector.
Yes.
And how do you coordinate that with all of the local nonprofits in the state of Florida?
So we are a membership organization. We have around 200 members across the state of Florida. We do, when I first came on, we did a listening tour around the state, and we really looked at what were the key challenges nonprofits were highlighting, what were the issues that were coming up, and we saw that they were pretty much the same irrespective of the county. It might vary by a few degrees, but in the nutshell, it was the same. Fundraising is one, capacity building, professional development, succession planning, and better job connecting and sharing their impact with elected officials. And so for us as an organization, that was a starting point on discussing how do we give nonprofits what they need and how do we change the conversation around the nonprofit sector.
Let's tease out some of those challenges that you mentioned, because I'm interested in that. So you talked about fundraising being one of the challenges in the nonprofit sector. What would you say is the biggest obstacle to that?
So unrestricted funding, overhead costs is something that comes up a lot. As nonprofits, we provide services within our communities. So programmatic funding is available via grants or via donor. But unrestricted funding, overhead costs is something that always gets a second look, or it's just, no, we don't fund that. But that's a big challenge for the sector because, of course, like any business, we have rent, we have employees, we have benefits, and we need to keep the doors open. And the recent federal shutdown is a great example of why those pieces need to be funded, because we had a charity in Fort Myers that serves domestic violence victims. They did not have reserves that would keep their doors open beyond 30 days. And so they were relying on federally funded grant reimbursements. Because of the shutdown, those reimbursements were not coming through because it was part of the the Justice Department. And so it raised a discussion around how are they going to stay afloat because they're still doing the work that they need to be doing without funding. And I think it's leading to a healthy discussion now within the funding community. Our sister organization is the Florida Philanthropic Network. They do what we do for philanthropy around having more risks around funding. So have an honest conversation with your grantee and see what their needs are rather than saying specifically, here's what we'll fund, and there's no other bucket that works for us. And that conversation is happening. There's a couple of funders I can think of that are now willing to have those conversations because they know that the impact of this organization is important. It's not just restricted program funding. So I think more foundations, more donors need to be open to that. But then that also means that more nonprofits need to be willing to say, I can't survive without overhead funding. I can't survive without unrestricted funding. I think we're just happy with what we get and we don't want to push too much. But I think if we push with data and evidence and an educational conversation, you'd be surprised at how many funders are willing to listen.
Do you think that funding challenge that you mentioned earlier is also connected to the awareness challenge, because you need to spend time educating your funders about your needs and also the greater community about the services that you provide?
Absolutely. I think one of the roles that I see for our organization, because nonprofits just wear so many hats, we are understaffed and overworked, is to raise that awareness around what overhead costs should look like. So certain times, especially the average donor, if we just don't even look at the foundation, an average donor will think, well, I want all of my funding to go to programs. I want low overhead as possible. So one thing that we do as an organization is talk to our state agency liaisons, our presentations in the community of low overhead has a limit. Too low means, will this charity still exist? That should be something that we look at. Each charity should really have at least 3 months in reserves, so that if they're not getting a reimbursement in time, if they're waiting for that check, it doesn't put them in the predicament of, will I make payroll? And a lot of charities have that issue, but they're not fully transparent about that because they don't want to cause an alarm. And so as an entity that speaks for the full sector, we can take that risk and talk about it, because we are not relying on that grant funder to fund us, but you as a nonprofit are. So we view that as one of our roles as a cheerleader for the sector and talking about the realities of the sector. And there's plenty of national and statewide data around that.
You talked about foundations and nonprofits, and I think there's some confusion about the difference between nonprofits and which ones are 501c3s.
Yeah.
Could you explain that for us?
Yeah, so technically, the presentation that we did today, foundations are under the nonprofit umbrella. So nonprofits as a whole, for the IRS's perspective, include multiple 501c3s, 6, 4s. 4s are organizations that have a little bit more leeway for lobbying. So things that are traditional to us as a nonprofit, we don't think about faith-based institutions, churches. Those are all still technically nonprofits. They might have a different designation. Chambers, fraternal organizations, PTA groups, those are all still nonprofit organizations. And then, of course, hospital systems, universities, those are still nonprofit institutions. And those all get bulked under that umbrella for the 501c status for the IRS. But then there's charitable organizations that traditionally in the community are known as the nonprofits, like your organization. And so that distinction is available on our website in the economic impact if people wanted to look for their community and filter out those non-charitable from the charitable.
And as we continue to talk about raising awareness and educating the community, how do you build that awareness and advocacy at the state level so that the community at large understands that this is the benefit of the local nonprofit?
Absolutely. So as an organization, over the last several years, we've put out specific research tools that we feel both the sector, government, and corporate sector could use and just learn more about the nonprofit sector. So the economic impact is just one. Our previous governor was really about the economy and jobs. So we really wanted to focus and drill down on how many people do we employ as a sector? How does that rank compared to other industries? We were 7th. We were very close to the construction industry for our employment figures. We employ a lot of people in the state of Florida. Therefore, we're driving our local economies. That's a narrative that nonprofits haven't really used before. So we use this report that's available free for anybody to highlight the impact the sector is making in our communities. We're also working on an individual giving survey to raise awareness about the sector. So nationally, we're ranked 44th for charitable giving and 50th for volunteerism. There's an assumption around maybe that's because we have a lot of snowbirds that come into the state, but they don't necessarily live here full time or donate here because this is their vacation or their retirement home. And so we're testing that theory to see if it's actually valid. We're going to be launching a survey April 1st that's available for anyone to fill out as long as they consider themselves a Floridian. And we're asking those questions. Where do you give? How do you give? And why do you give where you give? And so is it a matter of connection? You just don't know where the nonprofits are, or you have a lack of trust of, is this money going where it should be? And University of Florida will be analyzing those results and then helping us publish that survey by the fall of this year. And that will lead to a conversation around how people give and why they give. We also did a compensation survey last year. So how is our sector paying their individuals, paying their employees? How does that vary between Miami to Indian River to Pensacola? Because each region is so different. So we're always looking at providing tools that our nonprofits can use to advocate for themselves. All of this data is available so that they can leverage it to do better work in their local communities.
So just out of curiosity, if Florida ranks 44th in terms of giving, for the states that rank higher, are there any indicators that are just of interest to us or something that can serve as a learning for us?
So I think one of the reasons why we're as low as we are is because of our population size. So when you see that Montana is above you, Montana is a pretty rural state. So it's also based on population size. I think the other piece is our communities vary significantly. We have a lot of Puerto Rican evacuees that came in the last 2 years. So they necessarily might not have plugged into the community. So I think it's looking at how do we speak to all Floridians and not just the traditional affluent communities that we look to for charitable giving, because our state is very, very diverse and everyone hasn't really been tapped into ways in which they can contribute.
Oh, I like hearing that everyone could contribute. Everyone might have a different capacity to contribute, but that's something that we need to consider.
Yeah.
Sabine, we're going to take a break to hear from our sponsors, and we will be right back.
At the Kindergarten Readiness Collaborative, our vision is for every parent, regardless of income or zip code, to have the knowledge and tools they need to raise healthy children that are prepared for kindergarten. Our mission is to support our partners in developing a high-quality early childhood system that is family-centered. Our outreach and parent engagement specialists connect with families and build trusted relationships. KRC has chosen Fellsmere and Gifford as our two focus areas in Indian River County. Our Fellsmere office is located downtown in the city annex, and our new Gifford office is located within Victory Park Apartments. Our administrative offices are now located adjacent to Healthy Start and Treasure Coast Community Health in Vero Beach. The Kindergarten Readiness Collaborative, developing a high-quality early childhood system for all children in Indian River County.
If your household income in 2018 was $66,000 or less, the United Way of Indian River County wants to help you get your taxes done for free. Let our knowledgeable IRS-certified volunteers save you the stress and prepare and file your taxes for you. Visit UnitedWayIRC.org/free tax prep for details on all VITA sites in Indian River County. Vero Beach sites include the United Way Center on 14th Avenue and the United Against Poverty Center on US 1. Satellite offices are in Fellsmere, Sebastian, and Wabesso. Want to file your taxes yourself online for free? Visit myfreetaxes.com for another easy way to file. The United Way of Indian River County wants to help you get all the tax credits you're entitled to without having to pay. To get all of the details, go online at unitedwayirc.org/free tax prep. Once there, find out how you can file your taxes free online or call 772-203-5766 to make an appointment at one of the VITA sites listed. Maximize your refund. Call 772-203-5766 to make your appointment.
Hi, I'm Derek Ogden from Word of Mouth Computers and Electronics. Since 2009, my team and I have been providing South Florida and the Treasure Coast with the highest level of service in the technology field. Computers, networks, surveillance systems, web services, Wi-Fi systems, anything you need technology related, we're your guys. Small business technology and consulting is my passion. Whether your business has one computer or 100 computers, I will come to your office and give you a custom technology evaluation report, and you won't owe me a dime for it. That's right, a free, in-office technology consult, but only for a limited time. For your home or business, all you need is one number for all your technology needs. Call me right now before time runs out at 888-966-7228. Remember, there's no obligation. That number again is 888-966-7228. And ask for me, Derek.
A member of the iTex trading community. Your iTex dollars are welcome.
We're back to Moonshot Radio, where every moment is an opportunity to learn. I'm your host, Nivea Torres, Executive Director of KRC. And with me today in the studio is Sabine Perway. Sabine is the Executive Director of the Florida Nonprofit Alliance. Sabine, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I think we could chat all day about nonprofits and the nonprofit sector. And actually, I'm learning so much. I was a K-12 educator, and this is my second career, I guess. And I'm just fascinated by the way that we can provide direct services to the community in a different way. So thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Sharing so much wealth. So before the break, we were talking about funding and the fact that folks in the community might have different capacities. There might be some areas that we have not tapped. Talk to us a little bit about maybe how funding has changed over the years, or fundraising, I should say.
I think from funding, we're currently going through a generation of wealth transfer. So we have traditional communities that used to give their check and love the photo op and like seeing the kids' faces and the meals served. And now the new generation, like under 40, is giving, but they're giving in an atypical manner, whether it's a GoFundMe campaign, whether it's they're more risk. They're taking more risks. They're willing to give to a project to see if it's going to launch or not, but they want to see an impact. And so I think for nonprofits, one of the things that in my opinion, haven't moved fast to accommodate is data. We all have organizations that collect a lot of data, but we've had traditional outcomes. We'll say how many people we served, how many meals we served, and we kind of leave it there. And that's a great output that you have for the year. But a lot of the new work is around outcomes. How is it changing? How are you changing the landscape so that your organization's work is not just about feeding a meal to someone that might need a hot plate? It's changing that conversation of equipping them to be able to do that. One example I love is Pace Center for Girls. They show the return on investment of their work, which really matters now to new, under 40 donors, by looking at the cost of the juvenile justice system in Tallahassee. So the juvenile justice system says it costs them about $946 per day for a girl they keep in their system. And if they don't keep her in the system, and PACE is looking to make sure that she is averting that system, they're saving the taxpayer 946 times 365. I mean, that wasn't even math that they had to generate. That was math that already existed on the website. And they can now say, our program is $15,000 and it's a third of what you would be paying for keeping this girl in the system. That's a powerful statement. Yes. You are changing the narrative. You are preventing the issue, and you are able to talk about your return on investment. And I think we as a sector need to mobilize to use our data, leverage our data to talk about why we exist and how we're impacting our communities.
That's a perfect example. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for explaining to us how we need to get from outputs to outcomes to get a better impact and a better return on investment.
Yeah, and we're scared of data.
We are.
In the age of clouds and all these apps and texts, I get it. But that's also a great way to bring in new partners to the conversations. A lot of universities have data professors, data centers. University of North Florida up in Jacksonville, where I live, has now started a program where they are willing to help any nonprofit across the state of Florida come up with a robust system of measuring their impact. And they go through a competitive process of determining who those 3 or 4 nonprofits that they work for per semester are. I'm sure local universities would be open to that conversation. So we need to be a little bit more creative about how we tackle those issues.
That's an excellent tip. I'm going to follow up on that for our organization.
Yeah.
I think it's great to keep that in mind. Sabine, talk to us a little bit about the successes that you've had at the Florida Nonprofit Alliance and maybe upcoming challenges.
Yeah, I think for successes with elected officials in Tallahassee, it's always great when they get the impact of the work and they don't kind of turn away and go, oh gosh, here's another nonprofit coming to me for money. And so for me, successes include making sure that our electeds know that we're raising awareness of the impact we're doing in our community, having in our community. One was, partnering with the Florida Chamber Foundation. Here is a entity that works primarily with corporate businesses, and now they see the value of our sector. They included us in their Florida 2030 report. So they're seeing us as something that is going to grow into what's necessary for Florida, and I thought that was a huge win. I think challenges, advocacy in general scares nonprofits. They automatically assume advocacy equals lobbying. There's a distinction. They're nervous that if they do any work with our electeds, they would lose their tax status. And that's just not true. And that's something that we continue to empower nonprofits to advocate for themselves, because if you're not talking about the good work that you're doing, nobody else can do it like you can. And that's something we struggle to get nonprofits to understand, that it's okay to reach out to your elected official, have them come visit your community when they're not in session, when they're in their district. They'd love a photo op. The challenge isn't necessarily where to go, it's who. And if you can do that work for them, if there's 84,000 nonprofits, and if you can reach out and have a leg up, why not?
Mm-hmm. And what tips would you give? And you've shared a lot already, but for organizations that might feel that they've sort of plateaued, we're sort of in an evolution, but whether it's organizationally with our mission or whether it's fundraising, what kinds of things should we be keeping in mind?
I think a pulse check is always a good thing for an organization to do. How are we doing? Whether it's a strategic plan, whether it's polling your stakeholders, and stakeholders don't necessarily just mean your donors or your board. It means the clients that you've served. It means the community at large. It means the people that might have used your product 5 years ago, or your partner organizations. We just actually did this, and the results were fascinating. I learned things about my organization that I didn't know people were thinking about. And so it's always good to do a community check of how are you as an organization perceived? How can you improve? If you're willing to be vulnerable and ask those questions, I think people appreciate that. And I think that lends you to have a fresh perspective of where the organization needs to grow and where it needs to go.
I want to make sure I ask you about a big work, something significant that you're working on, the 2020 census.
Yes.
What could you share with us?
So a lot of people assume that the census is part of the Commerce Department. It's from D.C. and the federal government takes care of all of it. While that's true that it's administered by the Census Bureau, local communities really need to do the work to ensure that people turn up for the count. So we've been traveling across the state with our partner, Florida Philanthropic Network, to raise awareness in communities, because the local count, the local dollars you receive is directly related to that census count. And those numbers are fixed for 10 years. And so the hard to count community is specifically where the focus is. And that's, people under the poverty line, children, migrant communities, immigrant communities, single parents, renters. These individuals are typically either unable to or not likely to complete the census. And this coming census in 2020 is primarily online, which is a huge scary factor for me because people are used to getting this long form and have that habit, but now it's all online. And if people don't keep that postcard, which has their unique identifying code, they can't complete it. And so we've been traveling to ensure that local stakeholders that are the trusted voices, that are trusted by these hard to count communities, start talking about it, are starting to raise awareness, because the human brain requires 7 touch points in order for us to actually take action. So by this time next year, when the census is actually coming, they'll know, okay, we need to do this. And it funds all of our programs like BPK, Head Start, school lunches. We don't think about that, but it's directly tied to the work that we do as nonprofits, which is why we're so heavily invested in the work.
This is important for us to do, and it's important for us to know that we will not be receiving then a survey in the mail.
Yes.
It's something that we will need to complete electronically, and it will impact a wide range of services.
Extremely wide range. Yeah, there's a top 50 list, and that includes everything from, foster care to assistance for those that are below the poverty line, to the city council, redistricting. Politically, we're slated to gain 2 seats if people complete it in the same proportion that they did last 2010. But for nonprofits, it's very, very significant. A third of our state's budget is directly result of the census numbers. And again, it's fixed for 10 years. We can't go back and amend it.
Well, this is important. We'll make sure that we educate the community as the date approaches. Sabine, we are going to shift gears. And before we say goodbye, we want to make sure that we ask you a question. What is your favorite children's book?
So I was thinking about that because I knew you were going to ask. And growing up for me, it was the Bernstein Bears. But having recently become a mom, my son is a year old now, it's actually a book called Everybody Needs a Rock, which he was gifted. And it's just this beautiful book that kind of reminds kids of they can do anything and everything. And I never had that growing up, so that's always stayed with me.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you for joining us today. And like I said earlier, we could go on and on talking about this. We'll have to have you come back. Sabine, thank you.
Thank you, Nivea.
And until next time, this has been Moonshot Radio, where every moment is an opportunity to learn.